we have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
What did you find as you returned to Iraq this last time, Dar Jamal, about depleted uranium and its effect on Iraqis?
Overall, the country has seen a massive increase in cancer rates from the 1991 Gulf War up to present, even according to official Iraqi government statistics. In 1991, for example, there were 40 registered cases of cancer out of 100,000 Iraqis. By 1995, 4 years after that war, that number had jumped to 800 out of 100,000 Iraqis. And then
Dar,
by 2005, that number had doubled.
Dar, as you speak, I just want to say we're going to be showing images, and I want to warn our TV audience, for our radio listeners, if you want to go to the website, you'll be able to see the kind of images that that you captured, Dar, when you were in Iraq. Go ahead, keep saying what you were saying.
The most recent statistic I'll end with before I get into Fallujah and what these images are showing is that in 2005 we saw 1,600 Iraqis with cancer out of 100,000, so a massive escalation that continues. And going on to Fallujah, because I wrote about this a year ago and then I returned to the city again this trip, we are seeing an absolute crisis of congenital malformations of newborn. There is one doctor, a pediatrician named Dr. Samira Alani, working on this crisis in the city. She's the only person there registering cases, and she's seeing horrific birth defects. I mean, these are extremely hard to look at. They're extremely hard to bear witness to, but it's something that we all need to pay attention to because of the amount of depleted uranium used by the U.S. military during both of their brutal attacks on the city of 2004, as well as other toxic munitions like white phosphorus, among other things. And so what this has generated is from 2004 up to this day, we are seeing a rate of congenital malformations in the city of Fallujah that has surpassed even that in the aftermath of, in the wake of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that that nuclear bombs were dropped on at the end of World War II. So Dr. Samir Alani actually visited with doctors in Japan, comparing statistics, and found that the amount of congenital malformations in Fallujah is 14 times greater than the same rate measured in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan in the aftermath of the nuclear bombings. These types of birth defects, she said, there are types of congenital malformations that she said they don't even have medical terms for, that some of the things they're seeing they've never seen before. They're not in any of the books or any of the scientific literature that they have access to. She said it's common now in Fallujah for newborns to come out with massive multiple systemic defects, immune problems, massive central nervous system problems, massive heart problems, skeletal disorders, babies being born with two heads, babies being born with half of their internal organs outside of their bodies, cyclops babies literally with one eye, really horrific, nightmarish types of birth defects, and it is ongoing. And she, lastly, to really give you an idea of the scope of the problem, is that this is happening now at a massive rate, and she said her being the only person cataloging and registering cases with no help from Baghdad, who is denying that there's some sort of problem like this in Fallujah. She said that she could probably safely estimate that the number of cases, as high as the rate that she's seeing, could probably be doubled because so many people are having their babies at home and just taking care of it. You know, most of these babies are being born dead, and then they're not reporting it whatsoever. So this is an ongoing crisis, and the rate has not increased since last year, but it's not decreased either. It was still, when I talked to her last year, it was 14 times a greater rate of malformations in newborns as compared to the aftermath areas of the nuclear bombings in Japan, and it's the same when I spoke with her about this 1 week ago.
Jamal, do you know, has any U.S. government official ever publicly acknowledged that the U.S. used depleted uranium in Iraq? And what does international law say about the use of depleted uranium in wartime?
The Pentagon has admitted to using several hundred tons during the '91 Gulf War. It's hard to get official figures from them from this current, the most recent war, where certainly they've admitted that it was used, but figures range anywhere from another couple of hundred tons upwards to 800 tons. There's been no official statement that I've seen anyway from the Pentagon talking about the effects of these weapons either on the Iraqi civilian population or members of the U.S. military who use them, like the person in the clip that you played earlier. International law is very clear about these types of weapons. Any weapon that is known to have a lasting negative impact on the civilian population in the general area where it is used is technically a banned or a highly restricted weapon. And in this case, these types of weapons should not be allowed to be used. As I reported back in 2004 when it came out that white phosphorus was indeed being used in Fallujah, that's another restricted weapon where the Geneva Conventions state very clearly that if there are any possibility of any civilians in the area where it is going to be used, it is not allowed to be used. So the Geneva Conventions are very, very clear about these. And this brings up a broader point about the war, as we heard in an earlier clip from Michael Moore talking about the illegality of the war. It's good to hear this brought back into the discourse. Another individual, Robert Jensen, wrote an extremely poignant piece about the illegality of the war for Truth Out just yesterday. And I think it's important that we all remember on the anniversary that this was a war that violated the Geneva Convention. It is a crime against peace according to the Nuremberg principles, and all those responsible, Bush, Cheney, Wolfowitz, all the architects of the war, if the U.S. was indeed a member of the International Criminal Court, should be handled accordingly. And I think it's important that we remember the illegality of this, and that this continues, and that these crimes started 10 years ago that were perpetuated against the Iraqi people that we see now most blatantly in these birth defects of these people in Fallujah should never have even happened.
U.S. commanders in Iraq ignored evidence of torture and often failed to investigate the killing of civilians. Now, these are the major findings from the leak of 400,000 secret American military files from the whistleblowing website WikiLeaks. Now, the data describes widespread brutal torture of detainees by Iraqi troops, with some documents showing American authorities often turned a blind eye. The Pentagon's condemned what is the largest ever leak of classified documents, saying it will only serve to help America's enemies. The files also reveal that 66,000 civilians were killed in Iraq since the U.S. invaded, even though Washington had denied it kept any such record. The figure doesn't include scores of deaths during the U.S. two major offensives on the city of Fallujah in 2004. Its residents are still fighting the severest consequences of those attacks. Now, you may find some of the pictures in Paula Sleer's report upsetting.
His friends are outside, fighting for the ball on a football pitch. He's here, in the family tent, fighting a cancer that's eating away at his head and stomach.
I collected the splinters of the rocket after it exploded. Whoever I showed them to said they were American and contaminated, poisoned.
After the shrapnel struck 16-year-old Malik's head, a tumour appeared, while his father lost a leg in the attack, and also the family's source of income as a taxi driver.
I wonder if there are any weapons they didn't use against us. We in Fallujah are all contaminated. Sometimes I can hardly breathe.
Iraq is littered with buildings like this that used to be the headquarters of Saddam's secret police. In 2003, several Jadam rockets hit it. The full effect of those weapons is still being felt today.
US Marines first bombarded Fallujah 6 years ago. It came after 4 employees of the American security company Blackwater were killed and their bodies burnt. A report showed that after the 8-month standoff, higher rates of cancer, leukemia and infant mortality were found here than in Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the atom bomb drop in World War II.
We found that the infant mortality rates compared with Egypt and Jordan were about 4 or 5 times higher. And about 10 times higher if you take a country like Kuwait, where there's good health care.
In the last few years, hundreds of deformed babies have been born in Fallujah's General Hospital. Doctors dub them the white phosphorus children.
Between the late 90s and 2003, we had patients with nervous system malfunctions roughly 3 times a year. At the moment, we're getting 3 such patients a week.
This child was born with one eye, and with not a single day going past without a new case being registered, more and more doctors here are pointing a finger at the United States.
The American combat operations caused environmental pollution. Both the US and British sides admitted that they employed banned weapons.
Dr. Abdul Al-Faluji is also a father, or at least he was, until a year ago when his 12-year-old son died of cancer.
Most parents leave their babies in the hospital. They're scared by the way they look. These babies are doomed to die.
And die they do, far from the eyes of the world, because while Fallujah's streets might today be quiet, the city remains cut off from the rest of the country. Doctors here say they're under pressure to keep quiet. Paul Islia, RT, Iraq.
According to a new study published on Tuesday in the journal PLOS Medicine, nearly 461,000 men, women, and children died between 2003 and 2011 in Iraq. More than 60% of these deaths are said to have been as a direct result of violence. The study states that the so-called wartime crude death rate was roughly 4.5 per 1,000 people. That translates as more than 50% higher than before the invasion of the country. Lead author Amy Hagopian, an associate professor of global health at the University of Washington, also highlighted the failures of health, sanitation, transportation, communication, and other systems, and called on public health officials to assess the total effects of the war, something that has been hard to accomplish due to a lack of accurate data in the country. Now, this map shows the density of civilian deaths in Baghdad and cluster locations, with data having also been generated as reported in the WikiLeaks Iraq war logs from 2004 to 2009. Now, the study also estimated that an additional 56,000 deaths were not counted because of the emigration of households from Iraq.
This is the scene of one of the most shocking crimes alleged to have been carried out by American soldiers in Iraq. Based on evidence given at the hearing, one afternoon in March, 4 soldiers walked through the trees and approached this house. Here, according to specialist James Barker's statement, he and another soldier took it in turns to rape the 14-year-old girl. In another room, the girl's parents and 5-year-old sister were shot dead. This man, Stephen Green, is accused of committing all the murders. He's since been discharged from the army because of a personality disorder and is being tried in an American civilian court. Barker's statement said after Green had killed the 2 adults and the little girl, he came into the room where the teenager was being sexually assaulted. He had an AK-47 rifle in his hand. He said, "They're all dead. I killed them." He put the weapon down, raped the 14-year-old and then shot her dead too. Before they left, they poured kerosene over the girl's body and set it alight. They returned to their checkpoint, and Barker said he grilled some chicken wings. A picture emerged of what went on before the attack. According to specialist Barker, the soldiers spent the morning playing cards, hitting golf balls and drinking local whiskey. Private Stephen Green repeatedly said he wanted to go out and kill some Iraqis. They changed out of their uniforms. Green put on a ski mask. After the attack, they burnt their clothes and threw the AK-47 in the canal. The family were buried here amid outrage at their brutal end. The Iraqis will have to wait to hear if the accused will face a court-martial. Jane Peel, BBC News, Baghdad.
عادية بيها كتفوني قالوا ليش ما تبغي تحكي الحقيقة قلت لهم أنا ما أدري شيء أنا أحكي الحقيقة عاد عندهم واحد اسمه راني كتفني من ورا شد عيوني قالت ما يعني ما ترضي مو تحكين قلت له دا أقول لك أنا ما عندي شيء دا أقول لك أنا ما عندي شيء قال ما عندي شيء عاد واحد منهم جطني بالقاع بس شنو صار راسي وين على الكاشي عاد سوى اللي سواه هو يعني الدنالي اجا ذاك هماتين الدنالي وجا ذاك الثالث هماتين بس اتوسل بيه وامشي يعني بس هو يعني شلون صام حلقي ما يعني خليني اطلع صوت عن امي ذول الجماعه هم وياه عاد واحد من عندهم قال ها كملتوا نجي احنا همتين ندنا عاد بيها قالوا لا جت ترى لجنة أمريكية عاد أخذوني للقاضي قال ظل يحكي حكاية منه وحكاية منه عاد قال لي أنت ما عندك سوالف يعني مو زينة ما أحد يدناك يعني ما فات بيتش للدعارة قلت له لا ما عندي هيك يقول لي أكيد قلت له أكيد ما عندي هيك عاد من ماذا أبو نجمتين خلى يدي على صدري قال لي أنت خوش يعني صدرك يعني زين بعدك يعني ها قلت له أنت شو من جاي يقول سمحت شو سكت أحسن لك عاد واحد من عندهم قال لي جسمه قلت له عافية قاعد أمك وأبوك طلعني قال لا بروح أمي أطلعك بس بشرط تعطيني شغلة من عندك وحدة قلت له ايش هيك يقول أدنالك قلت له لا ما أقدر أنا طببني بغرفة يعني بيها سلاح نص أخمس وشرباية بس غرفة يعني صغيرونة قعدني بيها عاداك جابوا نجمتي ايش يقول له قال له لا عوفة علي يعني حلفت له بالقرآن الكريم قلت له نورة للنبي قلت له أنا ما عندي يعني شغلات يقول لي ما عندك شغلات قلت له ايه عدت لي الصندة سوداء شو اقول لك يعني بدي هبت لي البوري قال قام ضربني على زري قلت له يعني شو تريد يعني قلت له يعني اقول لك يعني اخذ من عندي قلت له بس انا ما اقدر انا مو مثل لك حاب يعني اعطيني ذيك الشغلات قال شوف احنا الشيء اللي نريده ناخذه والشيء اللي نريده نكتله يعني خلاص أنا ما أقدر الله يخليك أكمل قلت يعني أنت مجرد جايين على سلاح زين شو كنت تدورون على نسوان يقول لي هي متعة تتمتع بها ودش مرة شلون شمرة تتشلب قلت له يعني ما تخافون يعني أحد يطلع وراها ما يطلع وراها يقولوا لا إحنا ما حد يقدر يوقف قصادنا يقول بس شوفي أنت يعني إحنا سوينا صحيح وياك هاي السواية سوينا وياه فوق إحنا أربعتنا سوينا وياك بس هلا طلعت نكتلك قلت له ليش تقالني ما عندي شيء جاي يقول لي حتى لو تسمو حي العامل نكتلك أكو بيهم ما حد صورني من ده يصور يعني ما قبلت ديرت وجهك يصدقني براجدي قال لا دير وجهك نحفظ شكل الزين عاد صورني واحد من عندهم قال بس حي العامل ما تبقين بي اذا بقيتي بيها نمحيش من عندها.
Anti-Gaddafi fighters have taken control of the airport in the fugitive colonel's hometown of Sirte, the last stronghold of his loyalists. Reinforcements have been called in ahead of a fresh assault in the face of stiff resistance. Civilians continue to flee the violence in the besieged city, blaming NATO for only adding to their problems. Well, let's cross live now to Sarah Flounders from the anti-war group International Action Center. Thanks for being with us, Sarah. Locals say power and water have run out, as well as petrol and other goods, and NATO hitting civilian buildings. Now, how does this tie in with their mission to protect those civilians?
Well, from the very first day, this has never been about protecting civilians. It has been overwhelmingly a war on civilians. NATO is responsible for now into the 7th month of bombing, more than 30,000 sorties, more than 10,000 actual bombing locations. Again and again and again, it has been the civilians and the civilian infrastructure that has been targeted. Sirte is now without water, without food, without medical supplies, without operating hospitals. It is NATO, this is a NATO war where the so-called rebels are an auxiliary force that has been incapable of even taking any ground on their own that is not already pulverized, destroyed by NATO bombardment. This is a complete NATO war for the domination and control of the oil of Libya at a time of enormous and growing economic crisis in Europe and in the U.S. And they want to lay hold of this. It's an effort to destroy the resistance movement in Libya and that has continued under the most heroic conditions and under the most difficult conditions, where everything is from the sky, using from bunker busters to anti-personnel weapons to drones to, one weapon after another that are part of the U.S. and NATO artillery.
You're describing a very, very grim situation. Are we seeing a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding on the ground in Libya? I mean, who's going to help these people if NATO doesn't?
Well, NATO hasn't helped at all. They are only interested in the destruction and in getting the oil pumping again. And we can see this by the way in which NATO has carried out a war in Afghanistan to this day. We can see at the U.S. war in Iraq that there's no consideration for the civilians. 8 years into in Iraq, and there's still not a functioning electrical grid for the population. There's still not functioning schools and pure water. So it's certainly in Libya, the idea that there would be any concern for the civilian population, that is never NATO's concern. It's a military operation entirely, and the idea of getting things, even in Tripoli, up and running after a month, that still has not happened. So,
in one of your articles earlier this year, you say that imperialist military intervention poses the gravest danger for the people of the entire region. What kind of danger are you talking about?
Well, from the beginning, it's not only been a war for control and domination of Libya and for seizing hold of the oil and also the enormous cash reserves, more than $130 billion. But it has been a weapon against the Egyptian and Tunisian and the what's called the Arab Spring, the revolutionary upheaval sweeping the region. That an enormous war going on right in Libya is a way of pushing back and strengthening the hand of reaction in the entire region. So it is a danger. It's a real danger what NATO is doing. It's ships off the region, it's control of the air, and having a military base. It's finding a home for AFRICOM, which is the U.S. NATO command and control for all of Africa. So this is really an opening war into the region, and the idea that it has any humanitarian concerns, that has never been on NATO's agenda. We can't see it in any of the past wars NATO has been involved in, and we don't see it in Libya to this day. None of that is happening. Supplies aren't coming into any of the cities that NATO has bombed and destroyed. Instead, small rebel bands come in, totally incapable of supplying any of the civilian needs.
Right, Sarah Flanders from the anti-war group, the International Action Center. Thank you very much for talking to us this hour.
60,000, that's one estimate, of the number of Libyan civilians killed by NATO airstrikes approved by David Cameron in 2011. NATO flew 26,000 sorties over the oil-rich North African nation and 9,600 strike missions before the assassination of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. The National Transitional Council's estimate of the dead was lower at 30,000. But whatever the number, not a day goes by without more killing. Libya Body Count estimates the number of dead this year alone at 550. But do you remember David Cameron celebrating what he thought was a great NATO victory in person in Libya's capital, Tripoli?
Your city was an inspiration to the world as you threw off a dictator and chose freedom.
You don't hear much from Cameron about Libya these days. Maybe because some of the rebels he supported in Syria are now breaking Libya apart. The Americans fled the capital at the end of last month, and thanks to Cameron and NATO, Al-Qaeda-like groups may now control the fifth largest oil reserves on Earth, right on the Mediterranean.
In the context of Syria, according to Navi Pillay, the former High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations, the conflict, which began in March 2011, has already claimed more than 220,000 lives, according to UN estimates. Meanwhile, more than 12.2 million people continue to require life-saving aid. The fighting has also provoked a massive displacement, with more than 4 million people having sought refuge in neighbouring countries, while a further 7.6 million are displaced within Syria. At the same time, over 2 million people in Aleppo, in Dara governorates, have been affected by willful denial of water and electricity by parties to the conflict this month. Of the 212,000 people who are besieged, in conditions that deteriorate every day, only 304 were reached with food in January. In other areas where conditions deteriorate every day, parties to the conflict severely restrict access to those in need. In Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Lebanon, ISIL, has closed down the offices of several aid organisations, including the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. In addition, Ms. Amos observed that children were partially badly affected by the hostilities, with 5.6 million children now in need of assistance and well over 2 million children out of school. Basic services continue to be deliberately attacked at Kut, she continued. As needs grow, humanitarian organisations need to reach more people, but we are facing increasing difficulties in reaching 4.8 million people who live in areas which are hard to reach. And as the violence escalates and conflict lines continue to shift, I fear that these numbers will rise. Access continues to be constrained by insecurity and active fighting, but the parties to the conflict are increasingly deliberately obstructing the delivery of life-saving aid.
What we in America call terrorists are really groups of people that reject the international system